Action.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome to Historia, the podcast.
I'm Jamie.
I'm Kylie.
It's November.
It is, and
It's genocide month.
It's genocide month, as Jamie says. So we have a rough topic, as you should listen to part one. Okay, there is a part one.
Yes.
This is gonna be a rough week. But
Yes.
next week will be a little more lighthearted. So
Honestly, I love that.
the only hint I'm going to give you is that it is a person. So that's it.
I feel like how you've been laughing at it is just going to be like a random person.
It's not random. I mean, it's not random at all. Like, people know of this person, but like, it's just so funny how our episodes are so different. You're like, November's genocide month, and I'm just over here like, oh. You'll find out. All right. So, should we jump back into Nazis?
Yes, because this one is going to be pretty long because what page am I on of my notes? Oh, God. It's so hard to find a mouse. Yeah, I have like 10 pages of notes on this one. So, whereas like my last one was only like 6.
Okay. So, bear with us. I know you gave a trigger warning from the last episode.
This one's going to be a little bit more intense. For sure. This
a lot
one,
more intense.
Yeah. Last week was kind of just because I was just getting the foundation
I have hiccups. I'm sorry.
of the camps. But definitely this one, I'm going to get a little bit more into detail about what they did to the prisoners, who the prisoners were, and the numbers of how many people died.
Okay.
So, and the camps too. So,
Got it.
yeah, this one is more detail oriented because of just how freaking crazy it is and just how stupid the Nazi people were. So,
All right.
so welcome back to our second week. So before we get started, I also want to mention again where I got my resources, because if you're not watching or listening to the first episode, please go back, because I do mention where I got my sources. Of course, I got it from the Holocaust Encyclopedia website. Huge help. But also the book Inferno, The World at War, 1939 to 1945 by Max Hastings, the 651-page book.
It's huge.
It's huge.
She thick.
It's huge. Yes, she's very thick. With 2 C's.
2 C's. Hold on, I have to get my fidget.
Your fidget?
What
You still have one?
do you mean still?
I don't know. Weren't they like a 2016 thing?
Jamie, where'd it go?
Do you have like the popper one or the spinners?
No, not the spinner. I'm not 12.
We find those at the movie theater all the time, and we just keep a collection of them.
It's like one of those, like, there's hair stuck to it.
Oh, it's like a hair tie.
Well, yeah, but feel it. It's like,
Wire.
it's fun to, like, play with.
Mine are pens, and pencils, like mechanical pencils, and I end up breaking the...
Yeah, that's why I try to fidget. Like, I've been really fidgety because, like, I can't sit still. So I was like, I need something. So this helps. So.
Oh, yeah, I play with my ring.
Me too. All right. Well, anyway, now I'm ready. I got my fidget.
Good Lord. Now that introductions have been made, let's get into the stats. From the beginning of the camps to the liberation of them in 1945, there were roughly about 10 million people who were murdered during the Holocaust.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let that sink in. That's rough.
6 million that would be murdered in the camps and on site. Sometimes they weren't even murdered inside the camps. They were just found and killed. Would be the Jewish people, as they were the overall solution on making the world better in their eyes. The other 5 million would include Russian prisoner of wars, U.S. prisoner of wars, Polish prisoner of wars, the Roma people, so some others call them gypsies. You had the so queer people, gay people, they were part of it, and those with disabilities.
Gotcha.
So anybody who also political prisoners, I forgot to add them. Anybody who fell under these were against the Reich, and the Reich made sure to exterminate as many as they could possible. And they succeeded with 10 million people. These ideas started with Hitler, and through his campaign and eventually appointing as Chancellor of Germany, these camps became an established idea that would start the Holocaust. Out of the 44,000 camps / also ghettos that the Nazi regime would complete, the first out of all of them were the concentration camp Dachau on March 22nd, 1933. This particular camp would be used for political prisoners. First camp was Dachau. I would like to visit it if it's still up and running, because it is the first one. So Hitler believed these people that I mentioned before were the enemies of the state. These prisoners were these political prisoners that would be in Dachau were German communists, socialists, social democrats, and anyone of deviant behavior. So that they believe that was the gay people.
Yeah.
They believe that was part of the deviant behavior. They believe they were against the Reich's ideology because it wasn't to their standard. Dachau, unlike all of the early concentration camps of the Nazi regime, was the only one to stay intact for all of the war. So this being the first one, it stayed open for all of it because a lot of them would close periodically throughout the war, but this one in particular, because it was the baby, like the creation of the concentration camps, it stayed open. It was like a favorite. It was because of Dachau that all other camps would be structured and laid out the way that they were. This camp was first to house all the prisoners and the work they would be put into. Over the next several years, thousands would continue to be built as Germany occupied more territory and captured more prisoners. I have to mention that in this source that I used of the Holocaust Encyclopedia, they actually have maps that you can look at that has where all the throughout the years of where all the camps were.
Really?
Yeah, and there's a huge ass list. It's so crazy. So I apologize in advance if I do not get all the countries that the camps were located in. There are a lot. So countries that included concentration camps were Germany, East Prussia, Norway, Denmark, Italy, Croatia, Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, Hungary, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Austria, France, and Poland.
Wow.
That's a lot. It's a lot. Uh-huh. These camps would be located everywhere in these countries, and each of them had different purposes, like we mentioned last week. Some were transit camps, others were workforce labor, some were death centers. Some were it was all over the place. So pretty much anybody that they captured would be sent pretty close by to wherever, like those who were who were in France, because France was occupied by Germany. If you were going against or sending, if they found out you were Jewish, you would be sent to probably one of the France's concentration camps.
Wow.
So these camps started off small, and it took development to become the disgusting idea that they become big and stuff. So all of them were pretty small, but they would get bigger over time, as I will be mentioning Auschwitz, because that one is just probably one of the worst ones of them all, I would say. So along with the developing of the construction of the camps, there were also the establishment of officers who were in charge, as we briefly discussed last week. So as the concentration camp system started to expand through the occupied territories, they needed to set a reminder of who is in charge. So we had all the commanders, all the SS guards and whatnot, but you have to think that when you look at a German officer, there's always a specific attire that they would wear. So they would give them special fashion attire to pretty much give those who are higher up in charge, you would know who is who. Mm-hmm. So Those special higher-up Nazis, also labeled as the one in command, would periodically be called a specific name throughout the war. It would change kind of periodically. So in 1935, the names were given as SS Guard Unit and but would eventually change to the SS Death Heads Unit in 1936 because they wanted to appear scarier. Fucking weirdos. Wow. So one SS Death Head unit would be assigned to a concentration camp. So how would you point one out? These officers would be wearing the SS symbol of the skull and crossbones put on their hats, which you think of when you see a Nazi soldier. They have those skull and crossbones. But the SS Death Head unit, who would be one of the higher ups, would also be wearing theirs on their lapels that they would have, like, so there would be extra stuff and like kind of like they would wear it on their hat, on their lapels, and then they might be wearing them like on their shoulders, like the Velcro things that they have to wear. I don't know. This was how the Allies would decipher who was in charge of the concentration camp. When they would go into the camps at the end of the war, they would try to look for those who are in charge by what they're wearing. And a lot of times, those higher up guards would be like, I can't get in trouble. I don't want to do that. So they would force other just low, like middle level guards to switch uniforms with them.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so they wouldn't get captured. But eventually, Allies could point them out to be like, you're not a freaking SS guard. You're just a wee little guard who just got put into this.
Right.
Where's your higher up of officer? And if some would get caught, other ones would make their way out.
Jesus.
Yeah. So that was how they could be, I guess you could see how, like, who was in charge.
Yeah.
Much. So now we have a generalized version of the people who ran these places. Let's move further into the early years of the concentration camp system. By the invasion of the Polish, that would jumpstart the war, World War II in 1939, Germany had already established 5 other concentration camps. So by the start of the war, there was, oh God, here we go. There was Sachsenhausen that was constructed in 1936 and held many political prisoners, but this was not all people that were held here. Jewish people were also held here over time. Jehovah's Witnesses were held here over time, and even the queer community was held here. So it definitely brought in its, I guess, acceptance of people, of certain people, because at that point they just wanted to throw whoever they could into these. If you assume those who entered were just put to work, unfortunately not. In 1941, Russian prisoner of wars would enter this camp, and almost immediately all would be shot and killed.
Wow.
This would happen periodically throughout the camp's years of being open. This camp became so decisive that anyone who didn't fit their standard would be sent here. So it was very common that you're going to be sent to this camp. So the next camp was the Buchenwald that was established in 1937. This camp, we are going to go a little bit further into what you would expect when you enter this camp. Mm-hmm. I was going to go over it last week. That's where I was like, I already wrote about this. And I was like, I'm just going to skip it because it's better to just flow into it.
Yeah.
Arriving to this camp, the first thing you would see is the barbed wire fence. So you're in like a cart with a bunch of other people with you, with like a long ass line of other people behind you and in front of you. The first thing you would see in this empty field is a giant barbed wire fence. Mm. And you're like, oh shit, what is this? Entering, you would see watchtowers everywhere, like big stone watchtowers, and a guard that would be in each of them. So you just see people there with their guns waiting for you to do something wrong. There would also be sentries with loaded automatic machine guns ready to fire at anyone who misbehaves or if there was any uprisings. They were prepared, especially if anyone was to try and come in. Mm-hmm. They were ready. So first entering, I think they had a little bit different depending on how big the camp was. Their spread out was a little bit different, but it was mostly the same. So here at Buchenwald, when you first enter into the camp, when they open the doors and you enter, there is a bunker that is also known as the punishment block. That would be like on your left or right hand side. Here in this block, prisoners who broke the rules would be tortured and often killed in this area. There were also barracks that would be further inside the middle of the camp. There would be a bunch of just like small cramped buildings that were called barracks lined up, and like you would have dozens of them depending on how big the camp was, and they would be very, very small and cramped, and they would stack at least like 4 in a row of just bunk beds that would start from one part of the wall and ran all the way across the other part of the wall.
Wow.
And everybody, the people who were assigned to those barracks would sleep right next to each other. You were literally cramped like this, like super tight, to where you were sleeping right next to someone who was like, you didn't even know.
That is not fun.
No.
You can't even like turn your body.
No, you couldn't. And there would be like 4 other people on top of you in that sense.
Oh, God.
You can think about it. It's like during the slave trade and in the ships that were being transported to the Americas, they would have a similar setup to those barracks as well. So I believe that's where they got their idea from. So they also had inside the prison or the camps, they would have everyday places like laundry facilities that they couldn't use, a kitchen that they couldn't use. They were forced to work in them, but they couldn't use them. They had workshops that they had to work in. There were warehouses that they had to work in. A lot of these were kind of, these weren't really in like the sub camps, but kind of. Some of them were, depending on like where you had to work. Like the warehouses and the workshops would be in more like sub camps because it was like the working part of the labor camp, whereas like the main camp is where like all the barracks and stuff were.
Gotcha.
In some of them, eventually a crematorium and a brothel would be added to the places, depending if it was a kill center or not. And eventually some of them did become from work camps to kill centers. The guards would also have their very own space far away from the central area of the prisoners. Some would be like in the far left corner. Some of them even lived like right outside. Like if you think about the boy in the striped pajamas, the kid, he lived in a house that was literally like right down the street from the prison or from the camp. So and those were mostly the higher ups that would live in houses that were nearby.
That's so crazy to think about.
But some of like the smaller like menial guards, they would live just adjacent from everything. So they would have like their own little area. The last note that I will make on this camp are the medical experiments that were going on that were being performed on the prisoners. Here they tested vaccines against typhus, typhoid, cholera, etc. Due to these tests, hundreds would die because you're injecting the actual like disease into the people. And they were just seeing of like, oh, how will they react? A lot of them did not react well. So a lot of them died, unfortunately.
Dang.
Yeah. The next camp was Flossenburg, this was along the Czech border in 1938. This camp originally was just going to be kind of like a limbo area, like a transit camp before sending the political prisoners to forced labor camps. But over time, it became just like a regular concentration camp, like forced labor.
The usual.
Yeah, the usual. So within this camp, we are going to discuss the conditions people lived in. So like all the other camps, the prisoners were mistreated beyond many of what we can comprehend today. So it started with the extreme amount of work the guards would make these people go through. It even came to the point where prisoners were passing out from exhaustion while working.
Oh my God.
And getting hurt from the jobs they worked on. So a lot of them, like in the mines, they would sometimes they would like collapse and something would like fall on them and it would like break their foot or break their arm. Or if they were like farming and shoveling and something like they got like a nasty cut or whatever,
Yeah.
they were still forced to work.
Ugh.
They weren't going to get that like security of just, oh, well, we can patch that up later.
Right.
Like that wasn't going to happen. That was like a sign of, oh shit, I'm going to die soon because I just got hurt.
Well, yeah, and you can't sleep, you know, thinking of like you're going to die and like worrying about everything.
Yeah, and if you have those like dozens of other people sleeping right next to you, like it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. You got one guy snoring and no one else can sleep.
Yep. Exactly. So they were still forced to continue their jobs. Now, if one did not continue their job, punishment would be endured in the punishment block. Those who violated what the guards demanded would be sent to the block where they would be whipped, put into solitary confinement, hanged from posts, or even have to stand at attention for hours on end. This is like a prison 12 times worse, and you didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is hard to like comprehend that.
People could do this.
Yeah. I don't understand.
Yeah. All of this did not help either, as disease was widespread throughout this camp, as many were forced to work in disease-filled areas. So the ones where they had all the diseased people, or they were doing experiments on the diseased, on diseases and stuff like that, many of these workers would be put into these, and they didn't have masks or gloves. They were just put into this situation. And when they would get sent back to their barracks, they would get everybody else sick. So it became like a huge problem in this camp of just people dying because of all of this typhus and cholera and typhoid and everything. It was becoming a really big problem. This was not only the only brutal treatment that was going on. In this camp, rape between criminal prisoners, SS guards, to the weaker prisoners was quite common. So, and this was an all-male camp.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So they would pretty much instigated the guard, and it's crazy because they were so against like gay relations, but it was still like a thing that was going on.
Yeah.
But even though they didn't do it because they were gay themselves, they just wanted to rape somebody, and it was just men.
They just want to cause pain to someone.
But that's when they started bringing brothels into the area, and I'll discuss that a little bit when I get into the female concentration camp.
Gotcha.
So this particular camp, as like all other ones, mistreated all of its prisoners until the day of liberation. But before liberation, the Nazis tried to evacuate the camp. Like a lot of them tried to evacuate camps when they knew that the Allies were coming in or getting closer. Any prisoner of wars, they would hang. Anyone who was a direct threat when they were transferring people would be hanged. They would also try to kill anybody who was not going to be fit for transportation to another camp. And a lot of them actually left the sick and dying behind when they evacuated, because they were like, oh, they're going to die anyway. Like, let's not even worry about them.
Yeah.
This was actually an episode of Band of Brothers.
Okay.
It's probably one of their most emotional episodes in the entire series, when I think a few of the guys walked into a concentration camp and they were like, what the fuck is this? Because nobody really knew. They didn't believe it. Like, they heard rumors and everything, but no one believed it until they walked in, and a bunch of, like, in the scene, a bunch of, like, the sick and ill prisoners came out of, like, their barracks just completely just starved, you can see.
Ugh. See all their
they
bones
were,
and everything.
Yeah, and they were like, what the hell is this?
Wow.
It's such an emotional episode. I have goosebumps right now just even talking about it. It makes me cry every single time I watch it.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I watch Band of Brothers, I'm like, do I feel like crying today?
I've never seen it.
Oh my God, it's so good. The Pacific is so good too, because it's about the Pacific in World War II, those who fought in the Pacific, the Marines.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Okay, I'll have to watch it.
It is so gut-wrenching. I want them to come out with another one. And I thought they were, but whatevs. Let's get back to this crazy shit. While trying to evacuate, more would actually die on the transportation there. It could have been from the starvation, the exhaustion from walking, and malnutrition, or even being shot from being too slow. A lot of them would be shot for being too slow. So there would be just bodies along the road of whoever, they didn't care. It is estimated that 30,000 people died within this camp.
Jesus.
Yeah. So the next camp is Mauthausen in Austria in 1938. Now this camp was created as it would house all the Austrian traders, and it would be used as a forced labor camp. Prisoners would be transferred from Dachau to work on the building of the camp, and eventually would be stuck here. Yeah, so a lot of these particular camps, they would be like, oh, we're gonna A lot of them at first thought that they were gonna be let out.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, oh yeah, after you do this, like, we'll let you go. No, not gonna happen. So this particular camp became large in size as soon as the war broke out. And even more political, and eventually all other prisoners would be entering this camp. This camp actually added another group of prisoners, women. So women had most of their own camps, but as the war progressed, they were like, let's start adding women just for rape factor. So SS guards would transport women from the female camps and mix them with the favored prisoners and for themselves. So any prisoners that were like the good ones or worked in their favor, be like, oh yes, I completely like support you guys. They would create the brothels. And so they would rape them. So as more women periodically were brought into this camp, and eventually women became the main population of the camp.
Wow.
Throughout the war. Yeah. So Mauthausen is also a part of Operation K. This is where the Nazis would recapture prisoner of wars and bring them to the camp and to kill them. This would include executing them by fire squad or just flat out just randomly shooting them. Yeah. Some were tortured by being beaten to death or even starved. This was to get answers out of them, and when they weren't getting the answers that they wanted, they killed them. But no matter what, they were going to kill them. Even if they did get answers out of them, they're not going to save them. You're an enemy of the Reich.
Right.
Unique for this camp was that there was a gas chamber they added. They would kill up to 80 people at a time by shoving them into a room and locking the door and unleashing the prussic acid. So there was like different types of acids that they would use to kill these people. They were even provided a gas van that would kill up to 30 people at a time. So it would just be like this giant van that they would kill people in. So a relief that came to the camp briefly was a resistance. In 1943, Spanish, Czech, French, and even German prisoners would concoct an underground resistance on how they could escape and help those survive in the camp. There would be like an insider who would help them pass notes and stuff like that to, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to meet, this is how we're going to stay out of the guards' eyes. Mm-hmm. Like there would always be, a guard who would say that he believed in everything, and like it was pretty much an undercover position. So receiving help from outside, they were able to receive food to help feed those that were starving, hide prisoners from being gassed, and even hiding prisoners from being tortured at a time. So they would like hide them in like a hole or something like that. And so when they would do like the selection of choosing who was going to go into the gas chambers and who was like going to be tortured, they would hide them temporarily because they knew that if they tried to get them to escape, it wasn't going to work because they had a feeling that they were going to get caught. But they also wanted, they also were knowing of just like, okay, how can we help you through all of this? How can we build the resistance? Because it was not it was a decent size resistance, but it wasn't to the point where they could just like go in and just like liberate the entire camp.
Yeah.
Because they knew that they were going to get killed because the watchtowers, they had guards everywhere. They had the machine guns. Like it was not likely that they could just walk in and just completely destroy the camp.
Right.
So they had to find other ways to do it to make sure that the people were, at least some of them that were a part of the resistance, were going to survive.
Yeah.
So as with the resistance, it did not prevent the mass murder that was about to ensue on the final days of the war. As the Allies drew closer, the more the Nazis started to panic about them pretty much discovering everything, and they knew that they had to get rid of as many people as possible. On April 20th, 1945, a selection would be made and 3,000 people would be gassed on April 28th. The camp commandant, Franz Zieres, would be captured, but due to shot wounds, he would die a couple days later. So there was a resistance, but many of them would die that day due to the Allies coming in. So the last camp in the early years was Ravensbrück in 1939. Ravensbrück was the largest women camps in the Reich. It would start off with only 900 women, but by the end of the war, there would be around 50,000. In this camp, with such expansion on women and some men being put into the camp, it quickly became overcrowded. With being overcrowded came sanitary problems. In the barracks that were provided, as I explained, with all of those many people on just a bunch of bunk beds, there was only one washroom in each of them.
Ugh.
One toilet.
Oh, that's a mess.
Yeah, and plumbing was not great.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
So
it was stinky.
Yeah, this was going to cause sanitary problems, especially with women on their period.
God. Oh, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, at that point, if they're starving, their period probably was super light.
That's true.
But still, like, it's so easy for a woman to get, like, a yeast infection.
Right.
Especially when you have shitty...
When you can't, like, clean and take care of yourself in that way.
Well, yeah, because they're not going to have toilet paper.
Right.
They don't care. So, yeah, these women...
So rough.
Yeah, these women were not doing great.
I always think of periods back in the day. And I'm like, oh, how do you do that? Like, way back then.
Literally. Awful. So, due to these sanitary problems, there would be a typhus epidemic that would consume the camp. Those who were sick became a problem, of course. SS guards would line up those prisoners and at selection pick out the weak and ill in groups of hundreds. At first, they would shoot the selected people, but when that was becoming too much of a burden and they were wasting bullets at that point, they decided they would kill. They would do the accord with the operation of 14F13. This would transfer those selected to killing centers where they would be gassed. Mm. So they would just take them and be like, we're wasting these bullets on them. Let's just send them to kill centers. So that's what they did. This became a big part of the Ravensbrück camp. 5,000 to 6,000 were gassed in this camp. So like many other camps, Ravensbrück also conducted medical experiments on women. They would use chemicals on the skin to try and prevent infections, but only cause severe trauma on the body. So this caused a spread of infections. The doctors also tried transplanting bones, which involved amputations.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so the women would lose limbs.
Oof.
Yeah, they even experimented on sterilizing women and children, trying to find an efficient method to do so. A lot of women died during these experiments. So they're trying, if they couldn't kill all of the Jewish people or anybody else, they would just sterilize them so they couldn't have children. So brothels were also a common thing that came from this camp. They would transfer women from Ravensbrück to other camps, as earlier I was discussing, to be prisoners in these brothels. They were promised that they would be released early if they did their job for 6 months. But 6 months came and passed, and these women knew that they weren't getting out.
That's so hard.
Mm-hmm. Through the war, more camps would be established in all areas Germany occupied, and the more comfortable they got with believing they were going to win the war, the more comfortable they were with growing their camp sizes. New camps started to be established with subcamps within them. So as I explained earlier what subcamps were, they started to put these in like the bigger camps of just like to, I guess, keep it more organized, or just to give them a direct purpose of like, oh, they're going to go work over here, they're going to work over here, or we're going to kill them over here.
Yeah.
So these new camps were Augusten, Neuengamme, Grossrosen, Natzweiler, Stutthof, Majdanek, and of course, Auschwitz. Auschwitz was infamous for its hell it brought unto the prisoners it held and the death it caused. The camps I have discussed has nothing on Auschwitz and its death toll. Do you know how many people probably died in Auschwitz?
How many?
1.1 million.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Some of these other camps had 30,000, 10,000, 6,000.
Wow.
Yeah, Auschwitz had 1.1 million.
That is rough.
Located in German-occupied Poland, Auschwitz was established in 1940 and labeled originally as, there was like 2 different camps for Auschwitz. Mm-hmm. So you had Auschwitz I, which was the main camp, and Auschwitz II, which was like adjacent, kind of like in parts of it. Auschwitz II was the killing center.
Okay.
For it. So this camp was larger because of all the subcamps that were all over the main camp. So this meant more people to bring into the camp and help towards their solution. So they would have like the subcamp, like Auschwitz II would be where the killing center, they had like a subcamp of where like the work labor would be. They had another one of like a transit, like it was pretty much a big hub of where people would be sent. And you're like, I'm going to die either way.
Right.
Like if you were told that you were being sent to Auschwitz, it had a reputation.
Oh my God.
You're like, oh shit, I'm not getting out of here. In Auschwitz, with the total count being 1.1 million people, I need to explain these groups that were mass murdered. Out of the 1,960,000 of them were the Jewish people. 74,000 were Polish people. 21,000 were the Roma people, so also known as gypsies. 15,000 were the Soviets prisoner of war. 15,000 were other groups of people that were brought into the camp. So like Jehovah's Witnesses, you had the queer community, anybody who's disabled, political prisoners. So 15,000 others of them would die too. Little over 200,000 survived, which seems like a lot, but when there were over 1 million, that's not.
Yeah, no.
It's a very small percentage. During the Holocaust, the people who were taken prisoners had no longer their names or diversity to themselves. This made Auschwitz was very unique for this, of how they erased their identity. Instead, everyone was a number. Mm-hmm. On their uniforms, this was in all camps. You removed everybody's identity, and you were given numbers. So on their uniforms, they would be given, this became a problem eventually of all the number situation and keeping like a record of everybody. With people being murdered daily, it was hard to keep track of that number when the clothing was being removed and transferred. So when they would take them into the gas chamber, they had to remove their clothes, and they would give them to the next prisoner that would come in.
Okay, yeah.
So it was hard for them to keep with having so many people coming into the camp and them removing so many. It was hard for them to keep that number when that number was being reused. So they're like, we have to think of like a better system of what we could do. So Auschwitz, then the guards and the higher ups, and I'm sure Himmler finally found a way of how they could keep track of numbers. Instead of just sewing the number of their clothes, tattooing them would be a better solution. So I believe only Auschwitz did this.
Oh, okay.
No other camp did this. This was unique to Auschwitz.
I've seen like Holocaust survivors who still have their tattoo, obviously, and like, you know, they still have their number. It's crazy.
Yeah, so that's when you know that they were in Auschwitz.
That's good to know. Mm-hmm. Wow.
So upon arrival, those that were not immediately going to the gas chambers would be brought aside and given a number tattooed on their lower left arm. The number given would be the number that they would be in this camp. They started this on the Soviet prisoner of wars, but they all died off pretty quickly due to starvation, execution, and disease. So they're like, okay, we need to do this more than just prisoner of war. So by 1942, the SS guards started tattooing all incoming Jewish people. This was also to get confirmation if the prisoner escaped, that all officers would recognize it if it was an escapee. There were also some who were not tattooed. So if a Jewish person escaped and they looked on their arm and they saw the tattoo, they would be like, you're not supposed to be out here. Mm-hmm. And they would probably be immediately taken back to Auschwitz and killed.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was a way of them notifying, hey, they are Jewish people. They need to die.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones who were not tattooed were Germans, Czechs, and Polish that were brought to Auschwitz due to not following the rules.
Okay.
So this was just like regular, like political prisoners and stuff like that. Those who weren't, like, they were just those who disobeyed the rules. They weren't the ones that they believed were corrupt for who they are.
Gotcha.
So it's like everybody else who, like, with the Roma people, the queer community, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Jewish people, they were all getting tattoos, whereas, like, those who were just, like, the regular people, quote unquote, who just got sent in there for just being radicals and stuff, they didn't really get a number.
Gotcha.
So about 400,000 numbers were given to people at Auschwitz. So when you see someone who has that number, it's just like, wow. So also done at Auschwitz, nothing new, were the medical experiments. A famous and disturbing doctor at the time was none other than Joseph Mengele, also known as the Angel of Death. He is pretty famous. So Mengele would use twins in his experimentations to trace origins of certain diseases through, like, their genetic material.
Okay.
For, like, twins.
Yeah.
He did this on fraternal, identical. He did this mostly for just, like, the Jewish twins, the Roma twins, pretty much any twins that they get into the camp. Like, if anybody noticed, oh, these are twins,
right,
they would be immediately sent to Auschwitz.
Okay.
For experimentation. As he got full permission to do what he wanted, many of his subjects would die due to it. He also had this weird obsession with heterochromia, if you know what that means. So heterochromia is where you have, like, two different eye colors.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He had a really big obsession with that, and he even tried changing his own eye color.
How?
experimentation on himself. Like he would use he would use like chemicals to try and change
Jesus,
it.
he can go blind.
Yeah, I don't think it worked. He would also keep many of his eyes of his victims.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like all the different colored eyes. This bitch would eventually flee from Auschwitz when the Allies were coming closer, and he fled to South America. There would be like he would hide out for like 37 years in South America under like a different name. Luckily, this bitch freaking drowned after he had a stroke in 1979.
Wow.
Deserved it. But his victims never got the justice of seeing him properly trialed and executed. But honestly, how he died is so fitting. Freaking drowning.
That's hilarious.
Wow. So, Auschwitz was also not only cruel, disturbing, and devastating, but the guards also purposely tricked everyone into thinking it was all fine. The gas chambers that were in Auschwitz II were massive, and it could hold as many people as possible. Like they could fit like at least like 50, 60 people at a time. And they were like in these farm buildings that they had like multiple of. So upon arrival, like the other camps, everyone would be lined up, and those who appeared strong enough would be put into forced labor. The women sometimes would be chosen for brothels. The twins would be separated for the experimentations for the doctor. And then the other ones, they'd be like, okay, we're going to go take you to like the showers. They're like, what? So when they were brought to the farmhouses, there was an area where everyone would be derobed of their clothes and brought into a room where the SS guards convinced the people were the shower rooms. But when the door locked, they were all confused. They were like, what is going on? And then all of a sudden, they would start to see gas enter the room.
Oh.
This meant it was all over with. They finally, at first, many of them were very confused. Children in these rooms were crying. Mothers who had their children with them were holding them, because sometimes families would be brought into these chambers together.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and soon they would be dropping like flies. Like they would just see other people, they would be choking on their own breath because of all of that toxins that were getting in. And eventually they would wait until they would all die before opening up the doors, and the gas like kind of just went away, and all of them would be dead.
And to know, like, as a parent, that you can't do anything to help your kid.
Exactly.
That's devastating.
Yeah, I can't imagine. So this process was not always perfect, though. In October 1944, a woman by the name Alla Gertner discovered that she and a dozen others were going to be sent to the gas chambers. So she was doing work labor, but eventually she was chosen to be killed. Alla knew by now that these farmhouses were not good news, as anyone who went into the building never exited. And with her life on the line, she decided to go out with a bang. Alla and several other women would continually smuggle explosives from the factories they were working in into like their barracks, and like hiding them in like their outfits and like their bras and stuff like that. And as they were brought to the chambers, that is when Alla and the other women would throw the explosives, because they were trying to blow up the chambers and anything that was the crematoriums and stuff. They were trying to blow those up because they're like, if you get rid of this, they can't kill us through the chambers. So they ended up killing 3 guards and setting a crematorium on fire.
Oh my God.
So the crematorium is where they would take the bodies afterwards and they would cremate them. So there were no bodies left. Wow. And they found that. So when they saw the crematorium smoking, they were like, fuck.
Yeah.
So Alla would get caught, and in January, she would be hanged publicly in the middle of the camp for her crime. So everybody would have to see what she did. Mm-hmm. Her name, though, would live on, as like we were mentioning today. In the liberation of Auschwitz, the days leading up to the arrival of the Soviet armies, of course, the Nazis started to panic. They were like, oh shit, we're not doing so well. We're failing. This is a huge, huge camp. We need to start moving people and finish our job. So before deporting many of the prisoners, there would be a mass killing that would go on. Those who would keep up were shot and killed. When the Soviet army entered Auschwitz, they were met with 6,000 prisoners who were beyond sick and dying.
Oh my God.
It was a horrendous sight. So they would do days leading up before evacuation. They would try to gas as many as they can. They would leave the sick and dying and take who they could to any neighboring camp, but eventually that was not enough. So with the liberation of camps and the Nazi regime finally coming to an end, a moment of hope came to the people, but this was not the end. Many families were separated during the war, and even in the years after, many still had no idea what happened to their families. The constant bullying of culture still continued, and the trauma of those who endured hell still had to focus on healing. Germany was once again struggling, but the prisoners who were unfairly imprisoned were now free. The concentration camp system was something else. It is so sad to know that 10 million plus people had to go through this.
Right. I can't wrap my head around that.
To think in this system, there had to at least be like 15 million people.
Right.
Or less that were put into these systems. And it's amazing. Not amazing, but it's just shocking to know that they got away with it.
Yeah. Oh my God.
They convinced that many people to know that it was okay. And a lot of just the everyday people that lived in the villages and stuff, some didn't even know about it.
Mm-hmm.
While others, they were just like, I don't want to disrespect. And that's why a lot of people immigrated to America or to some of the other countries, because they're like, I'm afraid that because I don't support what is going on, I'm going to be put into one of them. So they left.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's scary because they were everywhere. They were everywhere. They had eyes everywhere. It was absolutely terrifying. But just to know, too, of like how many other Jewish people were absolutely terrified to live their life. And so many of them, including Anne Frank, had to hide.
Right.
For years. And it's just like, you're not living at that point.
No.
It's just, it's not fun. But yeah, this one was really hard, especially looking at all the photographs.
Right. I bet. Ugh.
It's absolutely devastating just to see how many of these people could not physically recover.
Yeah.
Because they were so starved for so long, or they had injuries that they didn't get medical attention from. Many of them couldn't walk anymore. Those who were amputated and somehow lived, they had to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And there were so many officers that were in charge of these camps that didn't get the proper trial because they were cowards and they took the easy road and escaped to Argentina.
Right.
And it's so devastating to know that like all of this happened not even 100 years ago. There's still people to this day that will not discuss it because it was so traumatizing and they have severe PTSD from it.
Yeah. That'll do it.
Yeah.
Damn.
It's absolutely devastating, especially like the one for Cortez and Columbus definitely hit hard. But I think knowing that there's people that we know, people who experienced it still alive to this day.
Right. Having to deal with that.
It hits a little bit harder because we have evidence.
Yeah.
of all of it,
That's true.
from the experimentation to the videos to the photography, from letters, and it's so sad.
That is really sad.
And these camps are still being used to this day. The camp system.
Mm-hmm.
It's still happening.
It's wild.
I believe there's some in China.
Sometimes you don't realize what, like, you're grateful for. I feel like this is like a humbling story, because it's like,
Yeah.
even when we think our problems are bad, people went through this shit, you know, like,
Yeah.
just like not even having a say in their death, you know. It's so devastating.
Yeah, especially choosing or being forced to one of the worst possible ways to die.
Right. Well, there's a lot to process.
Yes.
Thanks for taking the time to cover such a heavy topic,
Yeah.
because we knew we'd have to cover it eventually.
Yes, it definitely needed to be told, and honestly, I could have gone more graphic, but I decided not to,
Yeah.
just because it's already really heavy enough just to know that this happened.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Definitely.
where can you find us?
You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Historia the Podcast. You can also email us with your ideas, comments, anything at historiathepodcast@gmail.com. So stay tuned for next week. It won't be as heavy.
Good.
So, yeah.
We'll see you guys next week.
There's no good way to end this episode, so we're
No.
just going to go.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.